Tell us about the sliding doors moment. Was it the time that you lost your dad?
Well, what happened was I lost my dad in 1999, and he died at a pretty young age. He'd been in Vietnam, and I've always put it down to his exposure to Agent Orange, but he got a very rare disease called lupus. So he died at the age of 65, and I was sitting in the funeral service in Canberra, and I thought about my dad's life and what he'd done. It was a life of service. He'd been in the army, then been in the federal parliament, and then after parliament he'd served the community in northern Tasmania. I thought, well, what am I doing? I've got a great business career, I'm looking after my family, but I'm not putting back into my community. So a few years later, when I heard that the Liberal Party were looking for a candidate for the Lord Mayoralty, being of a view that the Eden Labor administration headed by Jim Sawley weren't doing enough in terms of the infrastructure needs of the city, I thought, well, here's how I can serve, and I put my hand up.
Yeah, and you virtually stormed into those roles. You stormed into City Hall, you stormed into the leadership of the opposition and then Premier of Queensland. You weren't mucking around, and there's a little bit of your experience in the army getting things done in the way that you started your political career. Would you agree?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I'm about outcomes and not about the politics. That was always my thing. I learnt to, frankly, get into the profession of politics and play a fairly good political game, if I can put it that way. But for me, ultimately, if it had to be done, it was done, and it had to be approached in that way. And sadly, my biggest criticism, and I often am saying this on this network, is that more and more the politicians we're seeing across the political spectrum in this country, at the three levels of government, are about the position and the game of politics rather than actually getting stuff done. And it really makes me cranky.